Good evening, Your Majesty, Mayor Turner, Dr. Lawson, Your Excellency. I want to welcome you to the historic Julia Ideson building. We are very honored to be hosting this very special event for you this evening. And I want to take my pleasure to introduce you to the great mayor of the city of Houston, Mayor Sylvester Turner.
Thank you so very, very much. And let me start off by saying good evening to each and every one of you. And I certainly want to start by welcoming Her Majesty Queen Sophia to Houston, making clear the interest that the royal family has always paid to Texas. So if you'll join me, please give a rousing applause to Queen Sophia. And let me say, Your Majesty, that there were many others who wanted to be in this room tonight, but we are at maximum capacity. So we are honored to have you with us in the city of Houston. I had the distinct honor and pleasure to meet your son, the King of Spain, King Philip VI, during a trip to Barcelona in 2018, and it was a meeting that I shall never forget. I also want to welcome Spain's ambassador to the United States, Santiago Cabañas, our wonderful Consul General of Spain to Houston, Julia Omo y Romero, and so many, many others. And I certainly want to acknowledge the director of the Houston Public Library, who is with us tonight and who does a fantastic job in leading us. Please give it up to our director of the library. And I want to thank every one of you who's here with us on this particular evening. The Julia Ideson Library is a building inspired by the Spanish Renaissance. Its facade recalls that of the University of Alcalá de Henares, and also a cameo that recalls Antonio Marquil, a Spanish missionary and one of the fathers of education in Texas. The Spanish flag remains on the shield of Texas. And Houston's relationship with Spain is at the heart of our great city, the most diverse city in the United States, where 1 in 4 persons is foreign born, and more than 145 languages are spoken here. And in this most diverse city, the Spanish language is the second most spoken language, reflecting the significant Hispanic presence and history. We have a large Spanish business presence in all sectors, including culinary industry, oil and gas, leading doctors, and prominent Spanish figures in NASA. We embrace the idea of the Hispanic History Portal to further connect with our history. As it educates on the histories of Spain, it will likewise enrich the knowledge about Houston's own history. I want to again thank Her Majesty for visiting Houston and wish you a wonderful evening. And let me just say, Your Majesty, if you run into anyone in this city who is rude and disrespectful, that person is not from Houston. That person is from New York. Welcome to the city of Houston.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you Ms. Begonia Santos, she is the Executive Director of the Queen Sophia Spanish Institute.
Your Majesty, Mr. Mayor, Ambassador Cabanas, members of the board of the Queen Sophia Spanish Institute, ladies and gentlemen. Amarillo, El Paso, Nueces, Riviera, Río Bravo y Río Grande, El Dorado, Matador, Rosita, Matagorda, Isla del Padre. Most of you are thinking I am speaking Spanish when I pronounce these words, but I know that these Spanish nouns and adjectives conjure in all of you images of places, maybe even of moments in your personal lives here in Texas. The history of Texas, and indeed the history of America, cannot be fully grasped or comprehended without the history of Spain. And the history of Spain cannot be studied or understood without the history of America. We are one history. Somos la misma historia, compartimos una misma historia. History is forged by men and women, with their wise and their poor choices, with their lights and shadows. History is indeed a dialogue between the present and the past, and dialogues are between people. Because of this idea, many, since Plutarch, have tried to understand history from the perspective of the men and women who are its actors and subjects. It is through their eyes that we understand the times they lived in an effort not to vindicate, justify, condone, approve or disapprove, but to understand our times so we can better navigate them. These people from the past tell stories which are the threads out of which the larger canvas of history is woven. It is for these reasons that the Queen Sofia Spanish Institute, in fulfillment of its mission to share the contributions of Spain and the Spanish-speaking people to the history and culture of the United States, is honored to present for the first time in the Americas the Portal of Hispanic History, the opus magnum from the Royal Academy of History. This portal contains the most extensive database of information on Hispanic history gathered to date. It shows the geopositioning of over 50,000 historical figures and more than 20,000 events, and includes nearly 150,000 geographical references. With this portal, which combines academic rigor and technological innovation, Spain is the first country in the world to have its history, which of course includes all territories that were once part of the Spanish administration, geo-referenced. This technologically advanced tool tells the history of Spain and ultimately the history of America and the world. The Institute would like to very warmly thank Her Majesty Queen Sofia for her constant support of the Institute's mission and its activities, and for her presence here tonight. It is always a joy to have you with us, Your Majesty. Muchísimas gracias, señora, de verdad, de corazón, por vuestro constante y generoso apoyo. We would also like to recognize the generosity of the Houston Public Library for hosting us tonight in this beautiful Spanish Renaissance-style library. And thank you all for your attention, and welcome to the United States debut of Portal Historia Hispánica. It is now my privilege to introduce the Director of the Royal Academy of History of Spain, Mrs. Carmen Iglesias, who will address us via video.
Majestad, señora, como tantas otras veces, vuestra presencia en este acto es una alegría y un honor. Una vez más, nuestro profundo agradecimiento. Alcalde de Houston, embajador de España en Estados Unidos, Santiago Cabana, director ejecutivo de la Biblioteca Pública de Houston, presidente del patronato del Queen Sofia Spanish Institute, directora ejecutiva del Queen Sofia Begoña Santos, autoridades, señoras y señores. Espacio y tiempo, geografía e historia, dos de las disciplinas sin las cuales no se puede entender el mundo físico, ni mucho menos el social humano de la historia, ambos interrelacionados íntimamente. Es un placer y un honor saludarles desde la Real Academia de la Historia en España y presentar ante ustedes nuestro portal de historia hispánica. La Academia fue creada en el siglo XVIII en España, en plena Ilustración europea y americana. Y desde hace 300 años sigue en plena actividad, adaptándose y evolucionando con los tiempos. Nació de la sociedad civil, de una reunión de amigos ilustrados en el año 1735, que reciben y se acogen a la protección del rey Felipe V directamente. El rey concede así, por una real cédula de 17 de junio de 1738, su real protección a la Academia y encarga como misión fundamental, cito literal, principalmente el cultivo de la historia, aclarando la importante verdad de los sucesos, desterrando los errores introducidos por la ignorancia o por la malicia, y conduciendo al conocimiento de muchas cosas que oscureció la antigüedad o están sepultadas al descuido. Hasta aquí la Real Cédula. Su función esencial, por tanto, es el estudio e investigación de la historia de España, de Portugal y de Iberoamérica, y de todos los territorios que configuraron la monarquía hispánica en sus más de 3 siglos, así como contribuir a la difusión, fomento y divulgación cultural de tales acontecimientos. La protección real se mantuvo siempre, a pesar de los avatares históricos, y sigue fijada en la Constitución Democrática Española de 1978. Sus orígenes en la sociedad civil y la inmediata protección de Felipe V y sus sucesores en la jefatura del Estado hasta hoy la han configurado como una institución de origen de carácter privado con proyección pública y personalidad jurídica propia. Así ha mantenido con fortaleza totalmente viva la historia de todos, custodiar los tesoros que dejaron los antecesores y mantener la independencia, libertad y rigor que han definido su trayectoria. Ha sabido evolucionar con los tiempos y en el mundo virtual que nos rodea y es pionera de este portal Historia Hispánica que tenemos hoy el honor y la alegría de presentar a ustedes. Una herramienta universal y fundamental para el mundo hispánico a un lado y otro lado del Atlántico, donde, como verán ustedes, se puede encontrar y conocer lo conocido y lo desconocido. Creemos que las palabras de Su Majestad el Rey en el vídeo de presentación de este año 2023 son un buen colofón y dejo paso a las mismas para que a continuación don Jaime Olmedo, alma y motor del proyecto, muestre ante ustedes el desarrollo y alcance de nuestro gran portal. Muchas gracias y muy enhorabuena por la tarea fundamental que realizan todos ustedes de manera tan vocacional, tan generosa y brillante. Y muchas gracias por darnos esta oportunidad de estrechar lazos entre nuestros países y nuestras culturas. Muchas gracias.
The Royal Academy of History was established to determine the dates and clarify the historical events, eliminating the fictions of the fables, adjusting the facts to the most precise chronology. And thus, history is served by chronology, geography must serve them both. 150,000 geographical references, from the year 1,350,000 BC to the present. 20,000 historical events, over 50,000 characters. Find historical figures and events across all 5 continents. The timeline of Hispanic history told year after year. make advanced searches of different people, periods, places, and subjects. All this content, developed with the utmost historical rigor, is interconnected through a comprehensive system of direct and indirect links that provides context for historical events and figures. Follow the footsteps of each figure and discover where their lives overlapped with their contemporaries. This portal establishes a network of relationships that has never been shown before. World history cannot be understood without Hispanic history. With this project, the Hispanic community is the first in the world to map its shared history.
El portal Historia Hispánica es un proyecto grandioso, fascinante, que despliega sus amplísimos contenidos y capacidades sin desplazar su centro de gravedad, nuestra identidad histórica y actual. En la navegación por sus páginas vemos nuestra cultura proyectada a través del tiempo en un ámbito geográfico global. La forma en que se muestran sus contenidos es la cartografía de nuestro pasado, pero también la guía para nuestro presente. La historia hispánica, el mundo hispánico, es hoy una realidad global con presencia efectiva y pujante en los 5 continentes. Y este proyecto que nos presenta hoy la Real Academia de la Historia hace mucho más visible y comprensible esa presencia a través del tiempo. El portal Historia Hispánica presenta una forma completamente novedosa de contar la historia. Estamos convencidos de que su ejemplo será seguido por otros países para mostrar y compartir su pasado, y nos enorgullece que una institución española como la Academia haya sido pionera en concebir y desarrollar un nuevo modelo de conocimiento que se difundirá a partir de hoy y que supone desde ahora mismo el lugar de referencia en Internet para conocer nuestra historia.
An innovative approach to history.
It is now my pleasure to introduce to you the Technical Director of the Royal Academy of History, Dr. Jaime Olmedo.
Your Majesty, Ambassador, Board of Directors of the Queen Sofia Spanish Institute, COO of the Houston Public Library, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very grateful to the Queen Sofia Spanish Institute, and especially so to its Executive Director, Begoña Santos, for bringing this presentation to fruition in this incredible place designed in the Spanish Renaissance style a century ago. Thank you very much, and many thanks to you all for joining us here today. It's a great honor for me to show you some of the capabilities of the portal Historia Hispánica, the most recent historiographical and technological project of the Royal Academy of History in Spain, first presented in Madrid 2 months ago in the Royal Palace in the presence of Their Majesties, the King and the Queen of Spain. And today is the first time this project is presented in the Americas. It is a vast portal that shows geoposition and linked to each other the events and the figures of Hispanic history. A portal that shows, in short, Hispanic history in its global dimension, spreading throughout the world. We have been able to geolocate the life and journeys of over 50,000 relevant figures and the location of over 20,000 historical events from 1 million before Christ until today, with special attention to all the territories that were part of the Spanish administration. This is the most extensive information about Hispanic history gathered to date, with nearly 150,000 geographical references. So, this is the first historical big data set in the world, and is entirely accessible for free on the internet. All this content is unique in its quantity and quality, since it has been prepared by historians and academics. And we can access it in 3 different ways. First of all, the home page. We can zoom in on the map where the geographical markers are displayed, isolated or in clusters, according to the highest or lowest density of historical data. When clicking over each geographic marker, a window shows quantified list of people who were born or who died in that place, sorted alphabetically, and also the historical event that took place there, sorted chronologically. And we are able to access the specific content of each record clicking on it. The second way to access the portal is through this bottom panel. It contains 4 areas, 4 specific searches on people, periods, places, and subjects: who, when, where, and what. And these searches have a double modality: a guided search following pre-established categories, or an advanced search that allows us the free combination of numerous and complementary search criteria. In the who area, we have the guided search. All vocations and fields of work are represented because the historical figures in the portal are not only related to the political world or public administrations. Figures come from fields like the fine arts, the economy, law, literature, the military, theater, sports, and so on. And we can search by these thesaurus, which organize all activities in age groups with over 2,000 descriptors: public administration, fine arts, sports, and show business, science, philosophy, economy, law and social science, humanities, religions, and society. And on the other hand, with the advanced search, we can do multiple combinations of all these fields for more specific searches in order to access to more accurate historical data. For example, users can search by any part of a person's name, date and place of birth, date and place of death, and any travel during his life, or by profession, gender, or religious and cultural identity. And moreover, this advanced search can also locate a specific word throughout all the contents on the portal, which is integrated by over 65,000 pages of text. For example, if we want to know the number of biographies related to trips, adventure, and exploration, we select this category that, for this particular case, recovers 2,083 figures. If we wonder about how many people of this group were born on a specific date, we can choose several options in date of birth, exactly within a period before, after, or around a date that could be expressed by a particular day, month, year, or century. In this case, for example, we can select before 2 centuries ago, so before 1823. And the search will find, here it is, 1,595 results. And if you want to know how many of these explorers born before this year were related to Texas somehow, it's very simple. We write Texas in the place of itinerary, and the results of guided or advanced search are shown in the same way. A map that geo-positions the results and 2 columns in which the characters and events are shown and numbered. And here we have 28 characters and 23 historical events. And here we have figures like, for example, Alonso Álvarez de Pineda, the first European explorer of Texas and the first cartographer of the Gulf of Mexico. Also, he was the first European who probably saw the mouth of Mississippi River, called by Álvarez de Pineda, Río del Espíritu Santo, Holy Spirit River, because that day, the 2nd of June of 1519, was Pentecost or Whit Sunday. Or Sebastián Caboto, who probably was the first European sailing Houston Bay in 1509. And also we have Pánfilo de Narváez, who died in November 1528 in an island near Galveston called by Alvar Núñez island of Malado, island of bad fortune, island of bad fate. Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca himself, who returned to Spain in 1337 after 10 challenging years wandering this south of the United States. And we also have Juan de Oñate, thanks to him and his expedition on April 30, 1598, a tradition took root in Texas. He celebrated the first Thanksgiving Day near El Paso, 23 years before the celebration of the residents of Plymouth. Or Francisco Vázquez de Coronado, who in 1540 explored the territories that became Arizona, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, and New Mexico in a long, long expedition that took him all the way to the Palo Duro Canyon here in Texas and Grand Canyon, becoming the first European to set eyes on it. And so are many others whose lives are in the roots of Texas and whose steps built El Camino Real de los Tejas, the northeastern segment of a network of royal roads radiating from Mexico City. El Camino Real de los Tejas served as a political, economic, and cultural link, and linking a variety of cultural and linguistic groups. The royal road served as an agent for cultural diffusion, biological exchange, and communication, and as a conduit for exploration, trade, migrations, settlement, and livestock drives. El Camino Real de los Tejas created a mix of traditions, laws, and cultures, and they are reflected in the people, landscape, place names, languages, music, and art of Texas and Louisiana today. In the section referring to historical periods, we can search by periods from prehistory until today. For example, we can choose the modern age, and after that, from the Catholic kings to the last one, Charles III of Spain. And the results are 189 figures and 1,308 historical facts. And we are able to filter by a specific term within the available list. For example, if we write independence, we select historical facts related to the integral role and support of Spain in the Revolutionary War of the United States, because Spain decisively contributed to the Continental Army's victory. For example, this fact and the information related to historical facts is presented in the following structure. First of all, a map with the georeference of the geographic areas where the event took place. Exact chronological dates, 1779, 16 June in this case. A description of the event, Spain declares war on Great Britain. Related illustrations and links to the biographies related to the historical event, not only the King of Spain, but others like Gardoqui, Galvez, Gonzaga, Grimaldi, and so on. And finally, this triple contextualization with quantification and direct links to other events that took place in the same period, in the same historical period, on the same subject or topic, in this case, war declaration, and in the same place or location. Well, we have seen explorer of Texas born before 2 centuries ago, and facts related to the US independence during the reign of Charles III of Spain, both of whom provide two interesting images of our shared past. But with this portal, we can also see the complete film of Hispanic history. In the section referring to historical periods, when there is this timeline that allows us to set a specific year, and the people and events of Hispanic history active in that specific year will be shown on the map, and you can zoom in on the map to access the specific context. For example, if we stop in the year 1000, the figures and events of Hispanic history are located within a limited geographical area. But if we go forward to the year 1475, we can see a wider presence in Europe and several figures in America before the arrival of Columbus. They are indigenous chiefs who developed relationships with the first Spaniards who arrived in America. In Acla were born Careta y Quibian, Calcuchimac and Rumiñahui were born in Quito, or here Quilliscacha. But if we zoom in on Mexico, we discover someone with a Spanish name. Here we have Juan Badiano. He's an indigenous man born in Xochimilco around 1484, who learned Spanish and Latin in the Royal College of Santa Cruz de Tlatelolco in Mexico, and he translated this work on herbalism, indigenous herbalism. If we zoom out to the global vision of the map and move forward in time, we see how a Spanish presence is expanding. And if we stop at the year 1600, we see how Hispanic history has become global. We have Spaniards in Europe, in America, in the Middle East, Asia, and Oceania, and this leads us to the next section, the search by places. In the area related to geography, we can search by physical or political geography. We choose America, then North America, and we choose the United States of America, and we could keep on searching for every single state. But if we search only for USA, we find 431 biographies and 342 events related to this geographical area and to the Hispanic history from the beginning of the 16th century until today. But it is also possible to search for a single town, like, for example, Pensacola in Florida. And here we have 51 biographies of people who were there and 10 events related to that place. And here we find, for example, characters like Bernardo de Galvez, one of the 8 honorary U.S. citizens in U.S. history, whose name is the origin of Galveston or Galveston here in Texas. And due to his victories against the British in Pensacola, Florida, and Mobile, Alabama, Galvez became a hero of the Revolutionary War, one who risked his life for the freedom of the American people and provided supplies, intelligence, and strong military support to the war effort. And this example, Bernardo de Galvez, shows us the structure of any biography in this portal. First of all, we have the headline with the basic biographical information about this figure. And on the right hand, we have established an index to easy access each part of the information provided. The body of the biography with data arranged chronologically, the work produced by the figures, whether they had any major works in the fine arts, literature, architecture, music, and so on, the bibliography related to this figure, and the author's name. But the biographical information is not only this. At the end of his biography, we find the whole network of connections for each figure. First of all, there are the links to the historical figures who are mentioned in the biography itself. And in second place, and this is completely new in hypertextual navigation, there are the links to those biographies in which this particular historical figure is cited. And in this biography, for example, we can see the connection with other eminent figures like Gardoqui. Gardoqui was in charge of delivering the significant funds allocated by the King of Spain to the North American patriots and developed a network to supply arms, materials, and money for George Washington's troops. And Gardoqui attended Washington's inauguration as the first president of the United States in 1789 and served as the first Spanish ambassador to the new United States. Other figures like, for example, Luis de Unzaga y Amézaga, governor of Louisiana, who in a letter to Charles Lee on September 4, 1776, was the first representative of an European power to identify and name the USA as an independent country. And we can identify other figures who support the independence of the United States of America. Furthermore, users can find an additional level of contextualization, dispar similar characters, which displays more entries of people who, in the same period, share one of the following features, or the same profession, and users can select each one, the same birthplace, the same place of death. So all figures appear interconnected, and this network of relationships among figures complement what we know about figures with data from other biographies. Finally, we have the section Event and Places. On the one hand, the portal links each character with a historical event. Here we have the Battle of Pensacola with the geoposition, the date, the description, the image, in this case, a historical map, and related characters. And on the other hand, the map shows the life itinerary, the geographical points of the biographies, the line of their lives. These life itineraries allows us to see the mobility of the characters and how many other characters were in the same place at the same time. And we can superimpose up to 5 trajectories. In this case, we can see the connection, for example, of Galvez with the Marqués del Socorro, the Marquis of the Help, in Pensacola with the red line. And we see, for example, in Louisiana, the connection of Galvez with Unzaga, whose life itinerary is drawn with the green line. Finally, in the watch area, the 4 area in the bottom panel, in the watch area, we can search for a subject or topics. Just as these new technologies now represent a new platform for the humanities, the previous technological leap was the printing press in 16th century. We can search, for example, for printing, and we will recover the characters and events linked to the printing press throughout our history. We can see, for example, this point on the Pacific Ocean. It is the place of death of Francisco Blancas de San Jose, author of this Tagalog grammar and the first printer in the Philippines, who died in that place in 1614 on a ship bound for Mexico. Among the characters, there are not only historical Hispanic printers, like, for example, Fadrique de Basilea, Arnaud Guirin de Brocard, George Cauchy de Kronberger, but there are also figures like, for example, Antonio de Mendoza y Pacheco, first Viceroy of New Spain and second Viceroy of Peru, because he played a key role in the arrival of the printing press to the Americas. After a diplomatic career in Europe with an embassy in England, he crossed the Atlantic, and in Mexico in 1539, in collaboration with the Archbishop of Mexico, Juan de Zumárraga, and an Italian typesetter, he established the first printing press in America, and he did it in that building, which is still preserved, the House of Bells, Casa de las Campanas, near the main square. And as we know, we can superimpose the Archbishop or typesetter trajectories, itineraries, in order to see the points of intersections, the confluence, the connection among these figures. Well, finally, we have the simple search box. This box at the top of the home screen allows us to search for figures, places names, specific fields of activity, topics, descriptors, and so on. For example, mission. The search results are always displayed on the same way, a map that geopositions the results and 2 columns in which the characters and facts are shown quantified. If we filter by Texas, we'll have 33 historical facts related to the mission founded in Texas by Spanish people from the second half of the 17th century. And here we have, in 1716, the mission de Nuestra Señora de la Purísima Concepción de Acuña, one of the oldest missions in the United States. And if we zoom in on the map, we can see the exact place nowadays. Or, this is a historical picture of the mission. Or, for example, in 1718, El Álamo, Fray Antonio de Olivares founded the first mission along the San Antonio River. Here we can see the Álamo. Or in 1731, Mission de San Juan de Capistrano. Here we have, and this is the facade. And if we zoom in on the map, we can see its current location in San Antonio, about 12 miles from the Álamo, and so on, as the Professor Dr. Ramos will show next. As we have been able to see, all historical facts and characters are linked to each other, showing a network of relationships and internal links that complement the information with data from other contents of the portal. In this way, we want to emphasize that the full knowledge about a historical figure, a historical event, or of a time period is not reached by the isolated reading of one single text, but by their connection with other contents of the portal. Over 500 national and international scientific institutions and 5,000 historians and researchers have already collaborated with this endless project. The Royal Academy of History invites you, the academic community, to send us consultations and proposals through this mailbox in our website in order to enrich and connect the interests related to our common history. So, the aim of the portal Historia Hispanica is to compile and share the knowledge of Hispanic history through its relevant figure and its historical events, many of them forgotten nowadays, and many of them now recovered thanks to this database. Thank you for your attention. It was a pleasure and a great honor to be here today. Your Majesty.
Thank you very much, Dr. Olmedo. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Raúl Ramos, Associate Professor of History at the University of Houston.
Su Majestad, bienvenidos a Houston. Good evening. I'm Raúl Ramos, a history professor working on the history of Texas and the borderlands before and after American annexation. Don't worry, I turned in my grades yesterday. There will be no test based on the presentations you've heard today. I would like to thank the Queen Sofia Spanish Institute and the Real Academia de Historia for the invitation to address this distinguished audience on the introduction of a new resource tool through the portal. I'm especially thrilled that this event is being held here in Houston, as it carries extra historical and cultural meaning. And I think you saw that in the murals downstairs on the first floor. Su Majestad vio los murales que tienen significado en la historia de Texas. It is important to note that we are sitting in a public library. These institutions are open to all and give access equally and without distinction. In that way, the portal Historia Hispanica serves as a public library to the world by taking centuries of people and events and placing them on a map, and most importantly, linking them. Anyone can take the path their interest and curiosity leads them to arrive at a new understanding of world history, and for us, understand the place of Texas and the United States in that global history. I come to this project as an educator, first and foremost. My students, here we go. My students become teachers, and they teach generations of children and other educators. I'm also a parent of two boys who came through the local schools where we are required to take Texas history in both the 4th and 7th grade. Here I am leading a field trip to the San Jacinto Monument and to the Capitol building with my son, who's a fourth grader there. He's the big guy in the middle there. So as a teacher, a historian, community member, a parent, and a Tejano, I'm deeply invested in resources to expand knowledge and understanding of the past in order to strengthen our future. Historia Hispanica's portal has the ability to transform how we understand the past by visualizing time and place. It gives us another way of looking at the past that we can compare next to our inherited narratives. Prior to the portal, if I wanted to explain the importance of Spain to American history, I would need to find a place where a Spaniard in their official linear history of the United States would appear, if I'm lucky. The portal connects this history to a longer story and a wider geographic frame. Free from the limits of time and place, a new story begins to take shape, a more accurate and inclusive story. Now, if we're talking about the history of Texas, I think the first place we should turn to is the Alamo. I can think of no better place to start to reconnect Texas history with its past than the building that symbolizes Texas. We've all seen this image, and many of you may assume, and many of you, I believe, have been to the Alamo. By the way, our visitors from out of state will be getting a Texas history lesson from this as well. And if you talk to most people who've been to the Alamo, they're always surprised the first time they encounter the building as to how small it is. It comes as a shock to many people. And much of that, I believe, it can be attributed to the fact that we have this iconic view of the building. This is what I call the postcard view of the Alamo, because it is a postcard, and we see this as a symbol throughout the country. We also think of the story that comes with the Alamo. When you see the Alamo, you think of the Texas Revolution. You think of maybe Davy Crockett or maybe John Wayne. But I want to point to what we don't see. We don't see so many aspects of the building that were once there because the building was destroyed in battle. And what we see when we see the Alamo is a reconstruction of that building, an incomplete reconstruction that took place decades after the war. The iconic building we see today has become a visual representation of the Texas Revolution, but we should also see Spanish elements in that facade. If you look to the left and right of the door, you see right here, these spaces. I mean, we've seen them every time we see the Alamo. They're there. But what is important is what's not there. What we see then are gaps, empty pedestals that have become architectural features that belong to the Alamo. But what they do is they disconnect the Alamo from its original use and history, because those pedestals were made to house statues of saints, as they do in any other Catholic church. According to records, the two lower spaces held the statues of St. Francis de Assisi and St. Dominic. Now, those were known for sure. The top two were meant to hold statues of St. Clare and of St. Margaret of Cortona. It's unclear if those last two statues ever made it to the church. The church itself had been destroyed in previous attempts and was being rebuilt once again when construction stopped. We know that later on, statues of St. Anthony and San Fernando were placed on those top areas. So what we see then is that those spaces don't hold statues currently, and the images we have of the Alamo today is missing its Spanish and Catholic connection. I also want to bring attention to a second question. Who built the Alamo? I mean, who literally put stone on top of stone? We know that the Alamo was built, that the Franciscan orders built the Alamo in the late 18th century, but the actual construction was undertaken by indigenous people of the region who were meant to live in the mission grounds upon its completion. These were Paranayas, Karankawa, Coco, Ipanis, Jaranames, and Sanas. So there we have it. The symbol of Texas history is a Spanish mission built by local indigenous people. Is that how we remember the Alamo? We tend to remember the Alamo as a place of frontier conquest and Mexican duplicity. The irony is that the history is right in front of us. And tools like the portal help us see that history when we look at the Alamo. We see the Alamo with new eyes. Let me give you an example of how I would approach the portal as a historian, as a teacher, as just someone who's curious. And let me tell you, all of you should log on this evening, and you might be up till 2, 3 in the morning because the connections are endless. When we begin to look at a map of we see sites in North America and South America. So we already see that not only are there plenty of locations, but with these numbers attached, we see that these are dense locations. When we zoom into the United States, we see that the Spanish history of the United States encompasses all of the United States, not just the Southwest regions. This is all American history. The portal contains an entry for the Alamo, as Dr. Olmedo demonstrated earlier. And what we see then is that the portal contains an entry that places it at 1718 and connecting it with the priests who started this project and others who were involved in building the Alamo. It allows us to see the history of the Alamo in its time and place, in a much bigger context. We see that we connect the Alamo with other missions across the Americas, not just in Texas or in San Antonio. We connect it with the founding of the colony. When we zoom into San Antonio more closely, we see 1718, Father Antonio de Olivares funda el presidio de San Antonio de Béjar por Martín de Alarcón. So I want to look a little bit more closely at Martín de Alarcón. I've known a little bit about him. I want to find out more. And this is where you can go into a particular individual and get a full biography. And what you learn from these biographies is that Martín de Alarcón, while his significance to San Antonio is important, he's significant in many other places. He has a much longer trajectory that's involved in the entire northern frontier and that's involved in other parts of the colony. So what we get here then is a biography that involves the entire frontier, and it connects this history with world history. In this way, Texas history is not just a small province in the early period, but part of a larger story. I also connect the Alamo as a mission with other missions in San Antonio. One that we hadn't mentioned before was La Misión de San José, which is has one of the most complete restorations. And really, when we start looking at the other missions, we have a point of reference that we can get a glimpse, a little bit of a view of what the Alamo might have looked like in a more full restoration, or at least with the inclusion of more of these elements that represent missions during this period. The portal also gives us a much broader geographic and temporal view. Let me reach back further, 200 years further back, before the Alamo, and look at another Spaniard who connected the continent. In this case, it's the entry on Panfilo Narvaez, who had been introduced already earlier. He shipwrecks in Galveston, but more importantly for our story here is that one of the survivors of this shipwreck was Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca, who spends years wandering the region. And so you get a view of not only where the shipwreck took place, right? So we know he starts here, but if we look around, we see that he wanders through Texas and ends up after almost a decade in El Paso. If you've driven through this area, you know how long it takes to drive through this area. You know walking this landscape over in some of the hottest months is incredibly torturous. But he made it because of his connections with the indigenous people, and he made it and wrote about it, more importantly. And those are the documents that we have left over from this particular story. He ends up in El Paso in 1534. One other element of that I think is worth mentioning around Cabeza de Vaca, which is that another one of the survivors of the shipwreck was an African descendant crew member, Esteban, or known in Texas as Estebanico, who survived the shipwreck and lived also among the people of Texas, giving us a connection to where African American history begins, broadly American history, not United States history necessarily. One last feature, you saw the close-up of the Cabeza de Vaca bust, which is here in Herman Park. Right? So we actually have a Houston connection with Cabeza de Vaca through this illustration. It truly is not just a global resource, but one that makes real these connections. Now, there are other examples of Spanish architecture. If you go to San Antonio today, you can visit what's called the Spanish Governor's Palace. Not much of a palace in some senses, but it's more of what it represents. It was the seat of political power in Texas for most of the colonial and the Mexican period. The building demonstrates another connection we can make, which is the way Spanish culture and technology was transplanted to Texas, but also transformed by the local people and environment. If you look at the building, for example, is made of adobe construction, which uses a mixture of materials and techniques that have circulated among many cultures over thousands of years. In this case, the Spanish Governor's Palace includes a building that used local indigenous practices, but also local materials to make it stronger. The fact of the matter is these buildings have lasted 3 centuries, and it's the legacy of those technologies that we need to recognize. And it's technologies that were not only transplanted, but that were transformed by local practices and local materials. So the missions that we saw earlier were the result of used limestone, for instance, which is an entirely different stone. It would take different stonework, but again, it's using local materials in this case. The portal contains examples of both conflict and cooperation between Spanish military officials and indigenous peoples throughout Texas and the continent. Here we see an example of cooperation. In this case, a peace treaty signed in 1785 between Spanish officials and los Indios Comanches. The treaty marks San Antonio as its location and gives us a moment of possibility and peace between Spanish government and Comanche peoples in the region. So we see other missions appear in the portal, and again, I wanted to highlight taking a term like misiones as a search term or as a theme, and then zooming into San Antonio and seeing the relationship, the geographic relationship downstream here along the San Antonio River. And again, one of those missions being Concepcion, and in this case, not just the location, not just the names, not just the year, but then an actual artifact, a document, another way we can add to this rich history. Indeed, construction technology was used by missionaries and other settlers in Texas to build their communities. Often these technologies were handled by indigenous peoples and improved or transformed with local knowledge. Here's an image of an acequia built to irrigate crops and provide water that grew the population in the area. Elements of these acequias remain present and serve as reminders of those critical urban infrastructure projects that built these cities. My point is that we can name cities, San Antonio, El Paso, Santa Fe, Los Angeles, and those are just names. The legacy of Spanish culture and the influence of Texas goes much deeper and it goes much further, and we see that through these connections. We see that through the technology and the design that were critical to building these cities, supporting a larger population and ensuring their survival for 3 centuries. I want to end by going back to where I started with the Alamo and the Texas Revolution. The portal also includes an entry for Juan Nepomuceno Seguin, one of the heroes of the Texas Revolution. Why is Seguin in here? Well, he was born in Texas in the Spanish period. He lived his life through 3 different nations. He was born Spanish, he grew up Mexican, and he was there. He was influenced by his father Erasmo Seguin, became mayor of San Antonio during this Mexican period. He then becomes an American after the annexation of Texas. In the American period, indeed, Juan Seguin personifies the kind of connection that we can make with these new ways of visualizing history. I want to conclude on the importance of understanding these tools to see history in a deeper and richer way beyond just contribution history. Connecting our history to these centuries of change and transformation helps us understand the complexity of the world around us today. Spanish language and aspects of Spanish culture thrive in our communities and with our families and around our kitchen tables. But like other living languages, the isolation of the frontier in the early period and the separation from the rest of Latin America by American annexation and expansion have transformed the language in other ways that might not be recognizable across the Spanish-speaking world. We see a recent report in the New York Times from last month on dialects in New Mexico that are still spoken that are not recognizable to modern speakers, but have their roots in this long and rich history. This history is unrecognizable only if we look at Texas after 1836. Our focus on history, and only focus on history through an American lens. The portal provides an opportunity for everyone to see the richness of our history, the complexity of our history, the depth of that development, the depth of that history, and not just for historians or specialists, but for the entire population to chart their own path and to make their own connection with the past. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professors Ramos and Almedo. This was quite a presentation. I hope everybody enjoyed it very much. Thank you again, both of you. And I invite everybody to kindly join us now at the Tudor Gallery for some cocktails. And let's give a last round of applause to our panelists tonight.